They walked past her as if she were a shadow, just another fixture in the opulent hall. The polished marble reflected their hurried, indifferent faces, but never hers. Her knuckles ached, raw from harsh cleaners, a constant throbbing reminder of her place in this glittering, unforgiving world. Dust motes danced like tiny, taunting sprites in the sunlight streaming through the grand windows, light she rarely had time to simply feel. It was a world built on layers of privilege, and she was perpetually beneath the surface, seen only when something was amiss, and even then, often blamed. This wasn't just a job. It was a constant battle against being erased, against the weight of judgment that followed her silent steps. Yet within the quiet chambers she cleaned, a small ember of hope flickered, a dream she guarded fiercely against the chill of reality. How does one rise when the world insists you remain invisible? When the very air you breathe is heavy with the scorn of those above you, when every day is a fight for dignity in a space that denies your very presence. This is her story, a quiet fight for recognition in a deafening world. If you believe everyone deserves to be seen, to have their struggle acknowledged, then join us. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience against the odds, stories that remind us justice can find its way, even into the darkest corners. Alara gripped the heavy brass polish, the metallic scent sharp and acrid in the air. Her gaze swept over the ornate carvings of the banister, seeing not beauty, but the grime that clung stubbornly to the intricate details. This grand estate, a monument to wealth and power, was her world, yet she was not of it. She moved through its vast rooms like a ghost, her presence acknowledged only by the faint squeak of her worn shoes on the hardwood floors, or the occasional sharp, dismissive glance from an occupant. They saw a uniform, a pair of hands, never the woman behind them. Her life was a symphony of silent tasks, the rhythmic swish of the mop, the soft cloth buffing glass until it gleamed, the muted thud of linens being sorted. Each movement was practiced, efficient, born of years spent perfecting the art of unnoticed labor. But inside, a vibrant garden grew, tended by the seeds of her dreams. She longed for a small cottage of her own, a place where the sunlight belonged to her, not filtered through the cold panes of someone else's mansion. A place where she could sit and read without the gnawing anxiety of unfinished chores or the fear of being discovered taking a forbidden moment of rest. The silence was often punctuated by sounds from the world above her station. The laughter of children playing in rooms she'd just meticulously cleaned, the clinking of expensive china during afternoon tea, the murmur of conversations filled with concerns about investments and social engagements that felt worlds away from her own worries about making rent. Sometimes a door would swing open, revealing a brief glimpse into a life of effortless ease, only to be quickly shut again, locking her back into her silent sphere. She remembered the sting of a cutting remark just that morning, tossed over a shoulder like unwanted refuse. A young woman, barely older than a girl, had pointed a manicured finger at a faint smudge on a pristine surface.
Honestly, can't you even manage a simple dusting? What do we pay you for?
The words were a physical blow, stripping away the thin veneer of dignity she fought so hard to maintain. She had simply nodded, her throat tight, her eyes focused on the offending spot as if it held the key to her entire existence. That was the constant battle, the daily erosion of her self-worth, the world telling her she was less than the dirt she cleaned away. But the dream, that fragile flower, remained untouched. A secret act of defiance in a world determined to keep her invisible. She was the underdog, yes, but she was not broken. Not yet. The harsh bite of ammonia stung her nostrils, a familiar, sickening perfume that clung to her clothes long after the shift ended. Her hands, raw and cracked from abrasive chemicals and endless scrubbing, ached with a deep, bone-weary fatigue. Every muscle screamed in protest, a chorus of dull aches from bending, lifting, and pushing the heavy buffer across acres of unforgiving tile. It wasn't just the grime she wrestled with. It was the sheer, relentless physical toll that ground her down, day after day, leaving her with nothing but exhaustion and the cold comfort of a few crumpled bills at the end of the week. Survival was a relentless uphill battle, each step coated in the sticky residue of someone else's mess. She was a phantom in the quiet hours, a shadow wiping away the traces of lives far more comfortable than her own. Sometimes, the disrespect wasn't just implied in the discarded wrappers and overflowing bins, but sharp, pointed, and aimed directly at her. There was the deliberate carelessness, the mess left specifically for her, a silent assertion of superiority. Then there were the moments that cut deeper. Passing by the reception desk one morning, head down, she heard the hushed voices, laced with disdain. A woman with perfectly coiffed hair and manicured nails looked down her nose as she adjusted her designer scarf.
Honestly, can't they find someone cleaner to do this job? She always looks so worn.
Her companion, a portly man in a crisp suit, chuckled softly, not bothering to lower his voice.
Right? Smells like she just bathed in bleach. Guess that's what happens when you hire, from certain backgrounds.
The words, like tiny, poisoned darts, found their mark, burning hot in her ears. She kept walking, her head bowed lower, the mop handle slick in her grasp. It was a constant, low-grade humiliation, a reminder that no matter how hard she worked, how much sweat and tears she poured into making their world clean, she would always be seen as dirty, as less than. This wasn't just work. It was an endless cycle of exhaustion, poverty, and dehumanization, a heavy cloak of hardship she wore every single day, simply trying to stay afloat. The meager sum she earned for this back-breaking labor was barely enough to keep the wolves from the door, reinforcing her place at the very bottom, the quintessential underdog fighting a silent, grueling war for dignity and survival. The phone rang, a shrill, insistent sound cutting through the quiet anxiety that had become her constant companion. It wasn't a number she recognized, and for a moment, she almost let it go to voicemail. Another potential disappointment she didn't have the energy for. But desperation gnawed at her, a cold, persistent ache in her stomach. Swallowing hard, she answered, her voice trembling slightly. The voice on the other end was clipped, formal, like starched linen. It belonged to someone named Mr. Davies, representing a private client. He spoke of an opportunity, a cleaning contract for an extensive property, unlike anything she had handled before. The details unfurled like a dazzling but slightly menacing tapestry. A vast estate, requiring meticulous attention, discretion paramount. Then came the number. The payment offered was staggering, more than she earned in several months of back-breaking work. Her breath hitched. It was a lifeline, a chance to pull herself back from the brink, a chance she simply couldn't afford to ignore. A chill, however, accompanied the spark of hope. Mr. Davies mentioned the client's name, or rather hinted strongly enough that there was no mistaking it. The whispers around town, the hushed stories of the notoriously demanding, impossibly wealthy Mr. Sterling and his sprawling hilltop mansion. His reputation preceded him like a dark cloud. Few lasted long working for him. Fewer still spoke well of the experience. There were rumors of eccentricities, impossible standards, and a cold indifference to the people who served him. A knot tightened in her chest. This wasn't just a difficult job. It was entering the lion's den. Her palms felt suddenly slick, and the air in the small room seemed to grow thin. The money was a dazzling lure, a siren song promising escape from her crushing debt, enough to quiet the constant hum of worry that vibrated beneath her skin. But the thought of facing the man whose name was synonymous with tyranny, even indirectly, sent a tremor through her. Mr. Davies waited on the line, his silence expectant. The choice felt monumental, a pivot point in her life. Stay safe, but sink slowly, or take a terrifying leap with a chance, however slim, of soaring. The weight of her circumstances pressed down, heavy and suffocating. The gleaming promise of that impossible sum of money seemed to pulse in the air. It tasted like hope and fear combined, a metallic tang on her tongue. She knew, deep down, there was only one answer she could give. This was where the real challenge began. The car swept up the long, winding drive, the gravel crunching under the tires like 1,000 tiny sighs. Before her, the house loomed, not just large, but colossal, an edifice carved from stone and ambition that seemed to scrape the gray sky. Turrets pierced the clouds, windows stared out like unseeing eyes, and the sheer acreage of manicured lawn and sculpted hedges felt less like a garden and more like a conquered wilderness. It was a scale she had only ever seen in movies, a world away from the cramped apartment and peeling paint that had been the backdrop to her life. A knot tightened in her stomach, a cold dread mixing with the awe. This wasn't just a new job. It felt like stepping onto a different planet. The heavy oak door swung inward silently, revealing an entrance hall that swallowed her whole. The air inside was cool, thick with the scent of beeswax polish, and something faintly floral and expensive. Sunlight streamed through a vast stained glass window high above, casting kaleidoscopic patterns onto the polished marble floor that stretched out like an endless, glittering lake. Her worn shoes felt suddenly loud and out of place on its pristine surface. Tapestries depicting scenes from forgotten histories lined the walls, their threads woven with gold, mocking the simple fabric of her own clothes. Every object, every surface, screamed wealth and power, a stark, almost cruel contrast to the humble reality she carried within her. A figure emerged from the shadows at the far end of the hall, a woman in a crisp, dark uniform, her expression as unyielding as the stone walls. This was Mrs. Gable, the head housekeeper, a woman whose reputation for strictness preceded her like a chilling wind. Her eyes, cool and assessing, swept over the newcomer, a silent judgment passed before a single word was spoken.
You're late. The car should have been here precisely at the half hour.
Her voice was low, perfectly modulated, yet it carried an authority that felt heavier than the grand chandeliers hanging overhead.
Punctuality is not a suggestion in this household. It is a requirement. You will find that expectations here are considerably higher than what you may be accustomed to.
The words hung in the air, sharp and dismissive, a clear warning. The initial shock of the house began to curdle into apprehension. She hadn't even seen her room, hadn't met the master of the house, and already the weight of the lion's den was pressing down. This was not going to be easy. This was not just a job. It was a test, a challenge she was already failing. And the tension, the potential for conflict, was palpable, a low hum beneath the silence of the opulent hall. The demands became grotesque, openly mocking her presence. The head supervisor, a portly man with a perpetual sneer, would stride past her cubicle, pausing just long enough to drop a new, impossible mandate onto her desk. First, it was the inventory audit of the entire warehouse, a sprawling cavern the size of several football fields, to be completed solo by end of day. The previous team of 3 had taken 3 days. Then came the task of reorganizing archaic paper archives, stacked floor to ceiling in a damp, forgotten basement, riddled with the biting smell of mildew and decay, all while dealing with malfunctioning lights and the unnerving scuttling of unseen things in the shadows. Each task was a physical and mental siege. Her fingers, raw and stained from sorting brittle, dusty paper, ached with a deep, bone-weary throb. Hauling heavy boxes of old files up creaking wooden stairs left her muscles burning, the sweat stinging her eyes. She felt the rough texturous concrete floors beneath her knees as she searched for lost documents, the chill seeping into her bones despite the thick layer of dust that coated everything. Her reflection in a grimy basement window showed smudges of dirt on her face, dark circles blooming under her eyes, but also a stubborn spark that refused to be extinguished. Sleep became a luxury, replaced by hurried meals eaten standing up and hours hunched over spreadsheets, long after the office lights went dark. The fluorescent hum of the empty building was her only companion, a sterile counterpoint to the pounding in her temples. Whispers followed her like a shadow. The other employees, emboldened by the open hostility from management, pointed and giggled, their voices drifting down the hallway like sharp little knives.
Look at her, still here. Doesn't she ever go home?
And
Probably sleeps under her desk. Doesn't want to miss a chance to, well, fail.
she heard them. Every mocking word, every snicker, every sigh of feigned pity. It was meant to break her, to chip away at her resolve, layer by painful layer. Yet with each seemingly insurmountable hurdle placed before her, something inside her hardened. The injustice of it all fueled her. The sheer absurdity of the tasks, designed explicitly to crush her spirit and prove her inadequacy, instead ignited a fierce, quiet defiance. She wouldn't just survive. She would complete them. She would exceed their impossible standards, not for praise or recognition, but as an act of rebellion, a silent scream of determination against the storm of their cruelty. Her body screamed in protest, but her will screamed louder. She would face the impossible, and somehow, against all odds, she would find a way. The fluorescent lights of the office hummed a lonely tune in the late evening quiet. Aisha hunched over her monitor, the only soul left on the floor, the glow illuminating the fatigue etched around her eyes. She was lost in the intricate patterns of her analysis, the dense data sets demanding her full concentration. A faint scent of ozone from the nearby copier mingled with the cold, sterile air. Suddenly, a prickling sensation crawled up her spine, sharp and undeniable. Like static electricity before a storm, she froze, every muscle tensing. She wasn't alone. The thought wasn't logical. She had watched everyone else leave hours ago, the heavy door sighing shut behind the last straggler. Yet the feeling persisted, growing into a cold knot in her stomach. Her gaze flickered instinctively towards the long bank of windows overlooking the darkened city street below. Was it just the reflection of her own anxious face staring back? No, this felt external, purposeful. She slowly lifted her head, scanning the rows of empty cubicles, the shapes of monitors and ergonomic chairs distorted by the dim light. The silence stretched, amplified by the frantic beating of her own heart against her ribs. It felt like a physical pressure, a weight pressing down from above. A fleeting shadow detached itself from the periphery of her vision. Near the entryway to the corridor, leading to the executive offices, a corridor usually locked this late, it was gone as quickly as it appeared, barely more than a ripple in the darkness. Her breath hitched. Who could be here, and why would they be hiding? The metallic taste of fear bloomed in her mouth, sour and unpleasant. Was this one of them? What if the colleagues who mocked her work come back to perhaps sabotage it? Or something far more unnerving? She couldn't shake the certainty that someone, or perhaps even something significant, had been observing her, not just noticing her presence, but watching her work, her effort, the quiet diligence she poured into proving them all wrong. The feeling was unsettling, yes, but beneath the fear, a strange, unwelcome thought took root. What if this observer wasn't hostile? What if they were assessing? The shadow hinted at secrecy, the locked corridor at importance. It was a chilling thought, wrapping around her like the cool air in the deserted office. Someone important was watching, hidden in the shadows, and their presence felt like a key turning in a lock she hadn't even known was there, hinting at a path forward she couldn't yet comprehend. The air in the sprawling estate hung heavy with the weight of unseen power. Every polished surface, every silently opening door, every manicured blade of grass whispered of the man who owned it all. He was a titan of industry, a name synonymous with vast, almost unimaginable wealth, whispered in boardrooms and hushed on city streets. His reputation preceded him everywhere, a complex tapestry woven from ruthless business acumen, legendary philanthropy, and a fierce, almost impenetrable privacy. They said he could move mountains with a phone call, shape markets with a whim, and that his eyes saw everything, even from miles away. Within the gilded cage of the mansion, his presence was felt like a low hum beneath the everyday routines. Though he was rarely seen, traveling the world on deals that shifted the global economy, his shadow stretched long over the staff who lived and toiled within his walls. They spoke of him in reverent, sometimes fearful, tones. The head butler might mention a specific vintage of wine requested for his next visit. The gardener might fret over a particular bloom he favored. And in the staff quarters, huddled whispers would dissect fragments of news about his whereabouts or moods. It was said he valued efficiency and loyalty above all else, and that his displeasure was a swift and final storm. The sheer scale of his fortune was baffling, a constant, silent reminder of the chasm between their lives and his. Priceless paintings adorned walls and rooms they never entered. Rare artifacts sat on pedestals in halls they only glimpsed through open doors. The very air seemed to carry the faint, clean scent of money, not metallic, but crisp, like freshly printed bills and expensive distant oceans. It felt both opulent and isolating, a world unto itself, governed by a god they never met. For some, the remote figure of the Tycoon represented a distant, impossible hope, a chance, perhaps, that true authority might one day see the injustices simmering beneath the surface. For others, those who currently held sway in the lower echelons of the staff hierarchy, his detachment was a shield, a tacit permission to exert their own petty tyrannies, believing his gaze was fixed too high to notice their actions. The mystery surrounding his true character, his values, and whether he truly cared what transpired among the people who maintained his kingdom, added another layer of tension to the already strained atmosphere. Was he aware of the quiet suffering? Did he know of the unfair burdens placed upon some while others thrived on cruelty? Or was the empire so vast, the man so distant, that the plights of those closest to him were simply invisible? The questions hung in the opulent air, heavy with unanswered possibilities. The air in the conference room thickened, heavy with unspoken expectations. Anya sat rigid, the cold metal of the chair seeping through her thin dress, a stark contrast to the sudden heat flushing her cheeks. Mr. Sterling, his face a mask of feigned seriousness, slid a thick file across the polished table. Its weight seemed immense, not just in paper, but in implication. This wasn't a standard assignment. The set of his jaw, the glint in his eyes, it spoke of a trap.
This is urgent, Anya. Top priority. Needs to be done by end of day Friday.
End of day Friday. It was Tuesday morning. Her breath hitched. She glanced at the project details inside the file. Complex data analysis, market projections requiring information she knew was deliberately withheld from her team. A comprehensive report structure she hadn't been trained on. It was impossible, not just difficult, but genuinely, mathematically impossible within the time frame. Especially without the usual support staff, who were conveniently unavailable. This week, across the table, Sarah leaned back, a slow, cruel smile spreading across her lips.
Quite the challenge, isn't it, Anya? Hope you're up for it. Some tasks really separate those who can handle the pressure from those who can't.
Her voice dripped with sugary malice, each word a tiny, sharp needle. Anya felt the sting deep in her gut. This was it, the definitive test, the one designed not for success, but for spectacular public failure. A wave of nausea washed over her. The scent of stale coffee and recycled air suddenly felt suffocating. Her fingers trembled as she closed the file, the smooth cardboard cover feeling slick and alien beneath her touch. The tick-tock of a decorative grandfather clock in the corner seemed to amplify, each beat a hammer blow against the dwindling seconds she had. It wasn't just about completing the task anymore. It was about surviving the deliberate, calculated attempt to break her. She felt the weight of every skeptical gaze, every whispered doubt, converge upon her in that moment. She was on trial, her resilience, her very worth, being judged by those who desperately wanted her to fall. The conflict had begun in earnest, escalating from petty harassments to a direct, brutal assault on her professional life. The sheer volume was crushing. Piles of forgotten files, boxes overflowing with unsorted documents, a decade of neglect staring back at her from every dusty corner of the archive room. The task was not merely organizing, it was reconstructing a fractured history, piecing together records deliberately scattered and hidden. It felt like being buried alive under paper, each sheet a stone added to the impossible weight. Others had scoffed, whispering their doubts, like a cold draft under the door.
She'll never manage this. It's too much for anyone, especially her.
Give it up. Some things are just meant to stay lost.
Their words echoed the knot of fear tightening in her stomach. But within that fear sparked a quiet resolve. She looked at the chaos not as an enemy to be defeated head-on, but as a puzzle, one piece at a time. Her hands, usually occupied with tasks deemed far less significant, began to work. No expensive software, no large team, Just her, a box of cheap gloves, and a magnifying glass. Her approach was almost primitive, yet deeply intentional. She didn't sort by date or category initially. She sorted by texture, by paper type, by the faint scent of age or specific ink. It was slow, painstakingly slow, like sifting through sand, grain by grain. Hour after hour bled into night after night. The sickly yellow light of the bare bulb. Her back ached. Her eyes burned, but her mind remained sharp, focusing on the subtle differences, the almost imperceptible patterns others would overlook. She discovered that certain types of paper were used for specific transactions, that a particular faded ink signature always appeared on forged documents. It was a secret language the archive spoke, and she was learning to translate it, not through official training, but through pure, focused care and intuition. She wasn't just moving paper. She was listening to the story each piece told. She felt the weight of the injustices hidden within the stacks, the echoes of desperate pleas and deceitful lies. This wasn't just a job. It was a retrieval mission, a silent promise to the past. Then the twist began to reveal itself. By cross-referencing details others deemed insignificant, a handwritten note on the back of a receipt, a specific company logo faintly embossed on stationery, she started finding connections. Connections that linked seemingly unrelated files, revealing a deliberate, intricate web of falsification and theft spanning years. Her primitive method wasn't just organizing chaos, it was exposing a carefully constructed deception from the inside out, like unraveling a tangled thread by finding its starting point. Her quiet, relentless work ethic, fueled by a deep-seated sense of right, was proving to be the most powerful tool of all. A chilling quiet had settled, thick with unspoken words, after she had finally delivered the completed task. The air in the office corridor, usually bustling with hurried steps and the clatter of keyboards, felt suddenly frigid, holding the stale scent of old coffee and something sharper, judgment. Heads turned as she passed, not with congratulations, but with narrowed eyes and tight lips. Whispers, like a swarm of gnats, began to rise, low at first, then growing bolder. She could feel their gazes, like physical touches, cold and unwelcome. Relief from the task dissipated, replaced by a prickle of unease that crawled up her spine. She saw Miss Albright, the department manager, known for her sharp tongue and ambition, leaning close to Mr. Henderson, the project lead, their heads together. Their eyes flicked towards her, and Miss Albright let out a brittle, humorless laugh that echoed strangely in the sudden stillness. Overhearing snippets felt like listening to a foreign language designed to wound. Couldn't have done it alone. Drifted from one cluster of desks. Got lucky, maybe, came from another. It wasn't praise for overcoming the challenge. It was an immediate, corrosive doubt cast upon her achievement. Mr. Henderson, the man who had piled the impossible task onto her shoulders, now wore a look of thinly veiled suspicion. He cleared his throat loudly.
Impressive. For someone with her background. Certainly wasn't expecting that.
His words hung in the air, dripping with insinuation, implying incompetence and surprise that she, of all people, could succeed. It felt like a punch to the gut, robbing the victory of its sweetness. Around her, others exchanged knowing glances, some smirking, others looking away quickly when she met their eyes. The whispers intensified, becoming a steady hum of negativity.
Must have pulled some strings, or had someone else do the real work.
Sneered Sarah from accounting, her voice laced with undisguised jealousy as she eyed the project report clutched in her hand. Disbelief twisted faces into ugly masks of suspicion. It wasn't just the task they questioned, it was her. How could she, the quiet one, the underdog they'd dismissed and overlooked, possibly achieve what seasoned colleagues had deemed impossible? The success didn't earn her respect. It earned her suspicion and resentment. The office, which had been merely indifferent before, now felt actively hostile. Every conversation stopped as she approached. Every glance felt like a silent accusation. The isolation, already a heavy cloak, now felt like a lead weight pressing down on her chest, making each breath a struggle against the rising tide of doubt they sought to drown her in. The air grew thick with unspoken accusations, each whisper a barb meant to pierce her hard-won sense of accomplishment. A cold dread seized her when the terse message arrived. Mr. Sterling requested her immediate presence. It wasn't a request, it was a command, delivered with the chilling politeness of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. This was it, she thought. The end. Her mind raced, replaying every slight, every accusation, every obstacle thrown in her path over the recent days. They had won. Her enemies, petty and cruel, had finally pushed the narrative far enough to reach the pinnacle of power. She imagined the scene awaiting her. Mr. Sterling, a titan of industry whose name resonated with authority, sitting behind a vast desk, his expression stern, perhaps even bored. She pictured him listening patiently to the fabricated complaints, the twisted truths, the poison that had been meticulously spread. She saw herself standing before him, small and insignificant in his imposing office, trying to defend herself against a wave of deceit, her voice trembling, her arguments sounding hollow, even to her own ears. Dismissal. That would be the kindest outcome she could expect. More likely, it would be a public reprimand, a final humiliating blow designed to ensure she never challenged the status quo again. A bitter taste flooded her mouth, acrid with fear and frustrated injustice. Her legs felt weak as she made her way through the labyrinthine corridors of the executive floor. The air here was different, thinner, scented faintly with expensive wood polish, and something else, something cool and sterile that spoke of immense wealth and detachment. The plush carpet beneath her feet felt unnaturally silent, amplifying the frantic thumping of her own heartbeat. The walls were adorned with art she didn't understand, paintings that seemed to watch her with impassive eyes. Every hushed voice she passed seemed to pause. Every glance felt like scrutiny. The sheer opulence of the place was overwhelming, a stark reminder of the chasm between her world and his. This was the domain of kings, and she was just a peasant summoned for judgment. She clutched the strap of her bag, her knuckles white, her palms slick with nervous sweat. The polished surfaces reflected her strained face back at her, a mask of anxiety she couldn't hide. The fear was a physical weight in her chest, pressing down, making it hard to breathe. She envisioned the smug faces of those who had plotted against her, picturing their anticipated triumph, and a flicker of defiant anger ignited beneath the fear. But it was quickly doused by the sheer scale of the power she was about to face. What could she possibly say? How could truth possibly compete with entrenched lies and powerful influence? The closer she got to the double doors at the end of the hall, the more certain she became of her fate. It wasn't a meeting, it was an execution. She raised a shaky hand to the heavy, ornate handle, bracing herself for the inevitable. The polished mahogany table gleamed under the cool, recessed lights, reflecting the stern faces gathered around it. The air was thick with unspoken expectation, heavy with the weight of the Tycoon's gaze. He leaned forward, his eyes, sharp and discerning, fixed solely on her. The scent of his expensive cologne was almost as overpowering as his presence. She could feel the prickling heat under her skin, the dryness in her mouth, but her stance remained resolute. This was the moment she had dreaded, yet braced for. The direct confrontation. His voice, when it came, was not a shout, but a low, resonant rumble that commanded absolute attention. It was laced with a skepticism that cut deeper than any yell.
Explain yourself. I hear reports of unconventional methods, of putting sentimentality ahead of hard numbers, of choices that defy basic profit logic. Are you capable of leading this initiative, or is this merely a costly exercise in idealism?
The bluntness landed like a physical blow, sucking the air from the room. Every eye was on her, waiting for her to crumble, to offer excuses, to shrink under the pressure of his immense power. This was the underdog facing the ultimate test, the weight of her community's future resting on her ability to articulate something the corporate world often didn't understand. She took a slow breath, the scent of dust motes dancing in the light shafts suddenly apparent. She didn't raise her voice, but her words, though humble, carried an unexpected force, born of conviction forged in struggle.
Sir, I understand that my approach may seem different from traditional models. I do not dismiss the importance of numbers. They are the lifeblood of any endeavor. But the people we serve, they are not numbers. They are mothers trying to feed their children, fathers seeking dignity in work, young minds yearning for opportunity.
She paused, meeting his gaze squarely. My methods are built on trust, because trust is the only currency that matters when you are rebuilding lives from the ground up. We prioritize dignity over maximum extraction, because a sustainable future is built on the strength of a community, not just the size of a balance sheet. We don't just deliver resources, we cultivate hope. Hope, sir, cannot be quantified on a spreadsheet, but it is the most valuable asset we possess. A profound silence descended. The rhythmic hum of the building's ventilation seemed impossibly loud in the sudden void left by her words. He didn't speak. He didn't move. His expression, initially etched with judgment, softened, almost imperceptibly. A flicker of surprise. Then perhaps, dawning understanding, replacing the hard skepticism. He simply stared at her, his mind clearly processing a perspective alien to his usual world of deals and dividends. The room held its collective breath, witnessing the slow, stunning transformation in the eyes of the Tycoon. Her simple, honest truth had pierced the corporate armor, leaving him momentarily speechless, caught in the stunned silence of a judgment reconsidered. He stared at her, a man accustomed to judging people with a swift, brutal efficiency honed over decades of cutthroat business. His gaze, usually sharp and dismissive, seemed to lose its edge, replaced by something akin to bewilderment. A long, heavy silence hung in the air, thick with the scent of polished wood and the lingering aroma of his untouched coffee. He hadn't expected this. Not from her. Not from someone he had instantly pigeonholed the moment she walked through his door. Another hopeful, another face in the crowd seeking a handout, likely exaggerating their plight for sympathy. But her words had struck something deep within him, They weren't just statistics or sob stories. They were a tapestry woven from raw truth, systemic failure, and a resilience that defied the limitations he believed defined people like her. He saw the faint tremor in her hand, the way her shoulders, though straight, carried the invisible weight of years of struggle. He heard the quiet strength in her voice, a counterpoint to the vulnerability he had assumed was her only characteristic. The air conditioning hummed softly, a steady, indifferent sound against the sudden stillness in the room. He felt a peculiar warmth spread through his chest, not unpleasant, but unsettling, the feeling of a long-held, cold certainty beginning to thaw. His eyes scanned her face again, seeing it now not as a symbol of perceived weakness, but as a map of endurance. The lines etched around her eyes told stories he had never bothered to imagine. The slight purse of her lips spoke of a quiet determination he had utterly misjudged. He had built an empire on recognizing value where others saw none, yet he had been blind to the immeasurable value of the human spirit sitting directly across from him. A slow breath escaped him, barely audible. It wasn't just her story. It was the undeniable truth of why her story was necessary. The systems, the biases, the sheer crushing weight of being born into circumstances that demand a fight for basic dignity. He had known of these things in the abstract, seen them as unfortunate but inevitable byproducts of the world he navigated. But hearing it laid bare, with such quiet, undeniable power, from a woman he had already dismissed, was different. His initial annoyance, his preconceived notions, began to crumble like dust beneath a heavy boot. He saw the world, for a flickering moment, through her eyes, a world far harsher and more unforgiving than his own gilded cage. The seed of a fundamental change was planted in that charged silence. The recognition that judgment based on appearance or circumstance was not only flawed, but deeply, profoundly unjust. He hadn't just heard her. He had seen her, truly seen her, for the first time. And the sight was humbling. A strange, heavy silence descended upon the service area the moment the imposing black car pulled away, disappearing down the winding driveway. It wasn't just the absence of the engine's hum. It was the sudden, palpable void left by the Tycoon's presence, and more profoundly, his unexpected, powerful approval. Every eye in the room, from the kitchen staff still wiping down counters, to the groundskeepers lingering by the back door, and most importantly, the supervisors who had made Sarah's life a living hell, was fixed on the young woman. Sarah felt it, the shift in the air, the sudden weightlessness in her chest, where a knot of dread usually resided. The cold dread that had been her constant companion for months seemed to dissipate like mist in the sun. A quiet strength settled within her, unfamiliar, yet deeply comforting. It wasn't just relief. It was something akin to vindication, sweet and long overdue. Mr. Abernathy, the portly, red-faced head butler, whose dismissiveness had been particularly sharp, visibly blanched. His usual bluster seemed to deflate like a punctured balloon. Nearby, Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper who had perfected the art of the icy stare and the cutting remark, noviously smoothed her apron, avoiding Sarah's gaze entirely. The cruel glint was gone from her eyes, replaced by a flicker of something that looked disturbingly like fear. Hushed whispers rippled through the other staff. They had seen the Tycoon's attentive posture, heard the snippets of impressed conversation, witnessed the handshake that lingered just a moment too long. The underdog they had silently pitied, the one they had been too scared to defend, was suddenly different. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. Their looks weren't just curiosity. They held a mixture of awe, confusion, and a calculating appraisal of which way the wind was now blowing. One of the younger maids, who had often shared sympathetic glances with Sarah but never dared speak up, offered a tentative, almost shy smile. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a dam breaking. Sarah didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The sheer, unadulterated panic emanating from Abernathy and Gable was payback enough for years of silent torment. Their carefully constructed world, built on the foundation of making others feel small, had been shaken to its core by a man who saw value where they saw only inconvenience.
Abernathy! What did he say exactly?
Abernathy stammered, his voice unusually reedy, cornering one of the staff members who had been closer during the conversation.
Impossible. He couldn't have meant she's just staff.
Mrs. Gable muttered, her voice tight with disbelief, addressing no one in particular. But he had meant it, and Sarah heard the fear in their voices, tasted the sudden, bitter flavor of their dawning realization. The era of their petty tyranny was ending. The air now hummed with a different kind of tension, the anticipation of change, the unspoken question of what came next for the woman who had unexpectedly caught the eye of the master of the house. Her rise, slow and improbable, felt like it was just beginning. He leaned forward, his gaze steady, almost unnervingly calm. The vast office, with its panoramic view of the city stretching out like a conquered kingdom below, suddenly felt much smaller, the air thick with unspoken weight. Sarah braced herself, expecting a polite dismissal, perhaps a token gesture of sympathy, before being ushered back into the harsh reality she had just fought so desperately to escape. Her hands, clasped tightly in her lap, felt slick with nervous sweat. She could smell the faint, expensive scent of polished wood and something citrusy, a stark contrast to the stale anxiety that had been her constant companion for weeks. Then he spoke. His voice was deep, resonant, carrying the undeniable authority of a man who had shaped his own world.
Miss Davis, your situation is regrettable. More than regrettable. It speaks to a fundamental breakdown of trust and ethics within certain levels of my organization. And frankly, it is unacceptable.
He paused, letting the words sink in. Sarah's heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. Was this it? An acknowledgement? A promise of investigation? She dared to hope for something, anything that wasn't just being ignored again.
However, merely addressing the past is not enough. We need to build for the future. A future where someone with your clear talent, your tenacity, is valued and empowered, not stifled by pettiness and malice.
He picked up a file from his desk, tapping it lightly.
I have reviewed your proposal, the one you were developing before things went sideways. It's audacious, risky, and potentially revolutionary.
Sarah's breath hitched. That proposal, her dream, the one they had laughed out of the room, calling it naive, unrealistic, her foolish idea.
Here is my offer, Miss Davis. I am creating a new division, a special projects unit. I want you to head it. Full autonomy, a significant budget, and a mandate to bring your proposal to fruition. Report directly to me.
The words hung in the air, heavy and unbelievable. Head a division? Full autonomy? Her proposal? It was a dizzying cascade of impossibilities, shattering the gray, oppressive world she had been trapped in moments before. Her mind reeled, trying to process the sheer magnitude of the shift. Just yesterday, She was contemplating how to survive, how to scrape by, how to even begin to fight the system that had crushed her. Now, this wasn't just a lifeline. It was a catapult into a different universe. Her eyes widened, reflecting the opulent room, yet seeing only the sudden blinding light of opportunity. A tremor ran through her. It was so far beyond anything she could have conceived. A dramatic, shocking reversal of fortune. It wasn't just a job offer. It was the keys to the kingdom they had tried to lock her out of. A chance not just to recover, but to soar. The sheer audacity of it stole her breath. Payback wouldn't come from fighting on the outside. It would come from building something magnificent, right in the heart of the empire that had scorned her. This was her rise, and it had begun with an offer that rewrote everything. The acceptance was a quiet earthquake within her soul. It wasn't a shout of victory, but a profound, steadying certainty. The offer wasn't just a new job. It was the opening of a door she had never dared to believe existed for someone like her. The heavy cloak of invisibility that had been her constant companion for years felt ready to slip from her shoulders. Transitioning meant stepping away from the familiar worn handle of the broom. The quiet rhythm of sweeping hallways, the distinct, sterile scent of the cleaning cart. Her last shift was a strange ballet of finality. She ran her hand along the cool, slightly scuffed wall of the corridor she had polished countless times. The touch a farewell to years of humble service. The echo of her footsteps, usually just background noise, seemed louder, carrying the weight of departure. She wiped down the counter in the break room one last time, the scent of disinfectant, sharp and poignant. It was a life left behind, not with regret for the work itself, but for the way she had been made to feel doing it. Reflecting on the winding road that led her here brought a bittersweet ache. Every scornful look, every dismissive wave, every cruel word whispered just loud enough to hear. They hadn't broken her. They had annealed her spirit. The hard lessons were etched into her very being. That a title meant nothing. That true character was revealed not in prosperity, but in how one treated those deemed below them. She had learned that resilience wasn't about never falling, but about finding the strength to rise, broom or no broom. But perhaps the most precious gain was the profound moral clarity. The value of hard work wasn't measured by the perceived status of the job, but by the integrity and diligence applied to it. Her years of sweeping were not a mark of shame, but a testament to unwavering dedication and self-sufficiency. Dignity wasn't something granted by others. It was an inner state she had fiercely protected, a quiet knowing of her own worth that no amount of contempt could erode. And the most searing lesson, born from the crucible of being judged so harshly herself, was the absolute, undeniable imperative not to judge others, never to look at someone and assume their story, their capabilities, or their inherent value based on a superficial glance or the work they did. The world was full of hidden depths and quiet strength, often found in the most unexpected places, wielded by hands that might be calloused, but hearts that were pure. Leaving the broom behind wasn't about abandoning her past. It was about carrying the wisdom of those years forward into a future where her hard-earned dignity could finally shine without shadow. Her future, once a murky, daunting path overshadowed by malice and doubt, had been completely rewritten, forged not by fate, but by unwavering faith and sheer tenacity. Her new reality was one of quiet strength and profound dignity. The whispers of scorn and condescension had been replaced by murmurs of respect and admiration. She walked taller now, not from arrogance, but from the solid ground of earned success beneath her feet. The once distant dreams now felt tangible, within reach. Her life, which they had tried to confine to a box of their making, had burst open into a landscape of possibilities she herself had cultivated with sweat, tears, and prayer. This transformation wasn't a miracle bestowed upon her, but the inevitable harvest of seeds she had sown in the darkest of times. It was a testament to the power of perseverance, the stubborn refusal to yield when every fiber of her being screamed surrender. It was a monument to integrity, the quiet strength of staying true to her values, even when surrounded by deceit and cruelty. And most breathtakingly, it was proof that sometimes the most powerful act of defiance is simply stunning someone with your absolute best effort. She hadn't fought their fire with fire. She had extinguished it with the blinding light of her own excellence, built painstakingly, brick by painful brick. They had expected her to break, to falter, to give up. Instead, she had risen, not just surviving, but thriving in a way that defied all their expectations. The moral lessons echoed through the quiet corridors of her new life, that staying true to your path, trusting in a strength greater than your own, and letting your actions speak louder than any words of scorn, can indeed rewrite your destiny and deliver a payback far sweeter than any revenge. The simple, powerful payback of living your truth and rising above. Her journey, marked by trials that had felt insurmountable, had culminated in this profound quietude. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky clearer and brighter than she could have ever imagined. The echoes of past injustices faded, replaced by the gentle rhythm of her own breathing, a testament to life renewed. She carried the scars, yes, but they were symbols of resilience, not defeat. They reminded her of the depth of the well from which she had drawn strength, and the unwavering light that had guided her through the longest nights. This wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning, built on a foundation that no external force could ever shake. It was the quiet, undeniable triumph of a spirit tested and proven true. The world spun on, but for her, the spinning felt different now, filled with purpose, peace, and the certain knowledge that faith, integrity, and relentless effort were the true architects of a future truly worth living. She had prevailed, and in her victory lay a lesson for anyone who has ever faced the darkness. Hold on, believe, and rise.